Welcome to the Earthworks podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Welcome to the Earthworks podcast. I am with an old friend, Dr. Gerald Pepin, who we now call, well, I've always called Jerry. And we're going to talk a little bit about the seed industry and about what goes on when seed is produced and what happens to it before it comes to you in a bag. And Jerry, thank you for joining us. It's a real pleasure to have you.
Pleasure to be here too.
I have to say I'm a little nervous, but only because we've known each other for so long. I don't even know how long we've known each other. Do you?
A long time.
We met a long time ago through probably through a lot of mutual friends in the industry. Certainly, our friend Don Nauman down in Sierra Pacific was
correct.
Quite possibly the gentleman who introduced us to you or to each other. But we have known each other. In full disclosure, Earthworks and Vista Seed actually share a booth at the National because we've been a good business partner with you folks at Vista Seed for a very long time, and it's been really wonderful experience because we love the family. We actually like talking to you, and it's been a real good camaraderie between the two, and I think we complement each other. I also want to say, excuse me.
I would say it has been, yes.
It has been.
I don't need to talk over you. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, that's the problem of the format that we're working with, but that's okay. We'll do our very best here. One story I will tell, and this is really where I got to know you as probably as well as anything, is you have for years, well, you've been a fisherman probably for your whole life, I'm guessing, knowing you. But you have for years been running a proper fishing trip for some of your better distributor partners, and going up to Canada. And the one year that you couldn't find anybody on this long list of people that you tried to find, you came down to me, and because there was nobody in the country that you could find to take this trip, I got a nice invite to go to this wonderful trip, and actually it worked out. It was wonderful. What island is that? I don't even remember.
Those are the Queen Charlotte Islands. The island we go to is called Langara Island. It's the extreme northern tip of the Queen Charlotte Islands.
And it's a beautiful setup. I mean, it truly was an experience, and in a lot of different ways. But I appreciate that, and I'm grateful that nobody else in the free world was available for your trip. So you came down you had to pull out the red card, and my name is of course on it. So there you go. What I want to talk about is, first of all, tell me a little bit about your background. I know you've got a PhD in plant breeding and genetics. You've been in the business for a few years now, I guess. But walk me through your background and give us a little insight as to what the history of Jerry Pepin is all about.
Well, I got my PhD at Rutgers back with Reed Funk. I think I was like his third graduate student, so it's going back a ways. I then got a job with a company called International Seeds, which is 10 miles down the road from here, which was bought by DLF. I then went with Pick Seed for many, many years. And finally, when Pick Seed had a change of ownership, a lot of us from Pick Seed started Vista Seeds. And here I am at Vista Seeds for the last 6 years or so.
And your primary role all this time has been genetics. You've been doing the breeding part of this, is that right?
That's correct. Mainly plant breeding and genetics, of course, developing new varieties, but also working with customers. Like you, I've probably given 1,000 talks, yes, through the years, and working with I really like working with the customers. Our customers, we have a very similar base for customers, which are regional and local suppliers, high quality companies. And we have so many in common, and that's really how we get to know each other so well. So, and I enjoy that a lot, working with the customers and working, with their salespeople and so forth.
Yeah, we both have had the pleasure to really work with a very strong group of independent distributors across the country, across the world, really, for that matter. Walk me through, Jerry, the process. I mean, I honestly, as an agronomist, I know very little bit about what you guys do. Help us all understand, what does it take to go from the conceptual, spot of coming up with a variety to actually getting it into a bag and getting it out into some guy's golf course or sports field? It's got to be a pretty elaborate process, I'm assuming, right?
It is quite elaborate. It all traces back to making individual selections from old turf areas and, cemeteries and turf, 20, 30, 40, 50-year-old golf courses, that sort of thing. And taking that material in, evaluating it, cross-pollinating it, making selections from those particular ones, planting them in turf plots, and then picking the best of the best, and then recrossing, reevaluating, rehybridization, keep looking for better and better improvements. And Rutgers by far has the best program in the world right now. We work closely with Rutgers. We also work with companies here in Oregon, Peak Genetics and Pure Seed Testing, that are working closely with Rutgers as well. So they're doing the breeding and selection. Vista itself does not have a research station. So we work with companies, these specialty companies that do, and most of it traces back to Rutgers, with a constantly hybridization going on, reselecting year after year after year after year, creeping bent grasses, perennial ryegrasses, tall fescues, fine fescues, and that's really how it's continual improvement, you might say. It's like so much of life, it's continual improvement. When you have something, you get it better and better and better. And so that's kind of how it, a new variety develops, with looking for a disease problem or a seed production problem, whatever, solving that problem, and then having a new variety that fits those criteria. And that's how the new varieties get started.
So you just went through a huge laundry list of stuff. So you got an idea. Yeah. Walk me slowly through, for a small brain like mine, slowly through the process. So you've got an idea that you want to come up with a new variety of a bentgrass. And are you looking specifically for traits? Do you start the process by saying, we need to find a bentgrass that's going to tolerate salt, or it's going to be less disease susceptible? I mean, what's the process from the very beginning in terms of deciding what you're going to do with a seed?
Well, we'll start with bentgrass, for example, which is a good one, because bentgrasses have improved so much. But basically with bentgrasses, you're looking for disease resistance, dollar spot in particular, Pythium and so forth. But dollar spot seems to be the one that's most important. And the other thing you're looking for is heat tolerance under very low cutting heights, persistence, disease resistance under very low cutting heights. And through the years, the varieties that have been produced get better and better at those characteristics. Like we have our Chinook and our Coho, two varieties we developed with Rutgers, and they're like night and day improvements over the stuff we had 20 and 30 years ago. There's such terrific performance under low cutting heights, persistent. They're very persistent, very disease resistant, particularly to brown patch and to a dollar spot. Dollar spot is a universal disease of creeping bentgrasses, and the better resistance to dollar spot, the better.
So let's talk about those two, Coho and Chinook. Well, you guys developed at Vista with the help of Rutgers. How does it start? I mean, let's start with Coho. I mean, you have an idea, you're looking for disease resistance. What's the first thing you do?
Well, with Rutgers being so involved in bentgrasses, we work with Dr. Stacy Bones there at Rutgers, and we visit here. We visit there once a year, thereabouts, and always looking for something better and better as far as those criteria goes for disease resistance and persistence under very low cutting heights. But at the same time, we want a variety that will also can be used for tees, greens, and fairways, which means it can't be super dense. You don't want something that's super dense that will contrast with varieties that are already out there. You don't want a super dark green color because you want it to mix with varieties that are already out there, because most bentgrass is overseeded into existing varieties. So you can't have something that's going to be extremely different as far as appearance goes. So you want the best genetics, but you want the look to be about the same as far as density and color goes, so it will match whatever's already out there, but it's just better. And
So
with these varieties, we have that.
Is this all selection? Is it all just observation? You're just looking at a field of grasses and saying, hey, there's some characteristics here that look good. Let's pull this together and start crossing. Or, I mean, again, I'm trying to get a feel for the science of.
This is selection.
It is all selection.
Selection in the turf plots.
Okay.
Based mainly at Rutgers. Rutgers has, right now, as far as creeping bent grass goes, nobody can even compare with them. So
right.
It's going to Rutgers, looking at the plots, talking with Stacy and Bill Meyer, we want this, or we want that, or what we're looking for. And they come through with a number of selections that are, we take those selections, we cross those together, and that will produce breeder seed. And that's how a variety originates, is from breeder seed. With that, we produce foundation seed and then commercial seed.
So you guys will sit down with Stacy and Bill and talk about a couple different varieties. They might have a plot and you say, I like this, I like this. And then oftentimes those, you'll select a few that will cross in their laboratories. Is that, am I right?
Yeah.
Close?
It would be crossed in the greenhouse, of course.
Right.
Or maybe in the field, in highly isolated areas where only the pollen from those selections pollinates, together. So there's a procedure that they follow that's very strict. And so the selections that you make are interpollinated together, and that starts a variety. Now you might start 20 varieties, but you only wind up with one. But that's kind of you narrow it down until you get exactly what you're looking for. And that's been the case with the Chinook and the Coho.
Actually, 20 doesn't sound like a whole lot to me. I mean, that's. I mean, if you're going from 20 down to 1, sounds like a pretty good hit rate. I mean, so is it that?
Well,
but those 20, I'm assuming there's a lot of work behind the scenes of those 20 as well, right?
We're starting with thousands of plots, working it down to 20, and then working those down to one particular polycross, which starts the new variety.
What? How long is this process? I mean, what again, use Coho if you want, or any variety, but how long? What's this time frame?
Probably a 6 to 8 year period between looking at, because they've got the infrastructure at Rutgers is already in place, so you don't need to start from scratch. So you can visit there, find what you're looking for, and then maybe in 6, 7 years, you will be able to actually bring a variety based on the criteria at that particular time. So that's some of the time frame we're looking at. If you start from scratch, making selections from whole turf areas, and start from scratch, it might take 12 years. But Rutgers has the infrastructure in place already, so that we can go back there and see all of the tremendous amount of material they have and pick what we're looking for.
So as a business, Vista Seed, do you have an investment in those 6, 7, 8 years? Is this all part of the business of the seed industry? You go in there and then have to, start the process 6, 8 years earlier, or are you just asking Rutgers to do all that work and then you're able to select a seed? How does the business of this work?
The next step for Vista is to work with a company like Peak Plant Genetics, Pure Seed Testing, which will actually take the material. They will put it together in small plots. They will increase it. They will select the breeder seed, reselect the breeder seed, and send us the breeder seed when it's all completed. It's quite a procedure. It takes maybe 4 years or so until you get the breeder seed. And then we take the breeder seed from there and start the seed production process. Breeder seed, the foundation seed, to commercial seed, certified seed. That's kind of the process. But the infrastructure after we've selected the variety is to work with an intermediary company here in Oregon, like those that I mentioned, and they will do that, increase that material for us, and then we'll go ahead and start selling the variety.
So they're bringing seed into Oregon, and you guys, I didn't mention this, Jerry, but you're in Corvallis, Oregon now, which is where Vista Seed is, and that's where I assume that's where most of the grass seed is grown in this country. Still,
all the creeping bent grass is grown here. All the colonial bent grass is grown here. 60% of the supply of turf grass seed is produced right here in the Willamette Valley. So it's a seed production area.
And so this process, though, I'm trying to get a handle on the level of, obviously you guys have a lot of time involved in this. If you're talking 6-7 years to get a variety to go to market where you can start to generate a return on your investment, there's got to be a fairly good upfront cost involved. Not that I'm looking for a dollar number, but I assume that there is a fairly good investment in any seed manufacturer, just like it would be for a pharmaceutical manufacturer to get to market. You guys are constantly working on new varieties and trying to find something that's going to make a market splash. Is that a fair assessment?
That's correct. We're constantly doing that. And the upfront fees are substantial, but a lot of it is made up in the royalties that we pay after the variety is produced. It's in production. We'll pay a royalty back to Rutgers and back to Peak Plant Genetics or Pure Seed Testing. They will get royalties as well. So a lot of the investment they put in, and when we start selling the variety, we pay a royalty that pays for all that. That's kind of
all right.
the way that it works.
But that makes sense. And then obviously it's still, still a lot of investment in there, but everybody's got a little bit of but in there. So I don't know if this is a stupid question or not, but was there ever a first bent grass? I mean, was there one parent from the very beginning in terms of bent grass that we're also familiar with?
It's not a stupid question. It's a great question because there was South German mixed bent grass 100 years ago, maybe even 150 years ago. This was imported in the very first golf courses all across the United States, South German mixed bent. It had velvet bent, creeping bent, and colonial bent, and that was imported all the way up until World War II. Obviously, it stopped then.
Yeah.
And it had a supply, the germplasm in that was tremendous. Every bent grass on the market now came from that particular material. It was a land race, what's called the land race. It was growing wild in Germany. They picked the wild seed, and that was what was planted at first, and everything has come from that since then. So South German mixed bent would be the grandfather, great-grandfather of every variety we've got right now. Good question.
What's the grandfather of the modern creeping bent grass?
Well, the modern creeping bent grass is again that South German mixed bent. Creeping, colonial, and velvet all trace back from that wild mixture from Germany. Creeping bent grass was a big component of the wild bent grass from Germany, and that's where everything we've got now traces back to that, basically.
But these were all separated out, and for the most part, our bent grasses now that we're really focused on in commercial turf management is the creeping bent grasses. Who really pioneered the modern creeping bent grasses, and where did they come from? And what were they?
Well, okay, the history of the creeping bent grasses, after the South German mixed bent, people would start selecting clonal varieties from there, like Nimicilla, Cohensi, Congressional. They would pick clones within there that was best adapted to their area, and these clonal varieties were developed. And they lasted well up into the 50s and 60s. And then, of course, Pencross came along back in the 50s, and Pencross is still being sold, even though it's pretty outdated, but it's still being sold. And so Pencross would have been the next step in that evolution. And then you had all sorts of new varieties developed from that. Even to this day, we're still developing, obviously, new varieties of bent grass all the time. So that's kind of the history. South German mixed bent, the clonal stuff, the vegetatively propagated bents, to Pencross, to what we have now. Lots of different varieties.
And Pencross came out in the 50s?
50s.
Wow.
You can believe that.
I still run into Pencross on golf courses all over the country. And,
I know.
And you'll probably hate me for saying this, but I actually like Pencross. It's as an agronomist, it really fills in nicely.
Yeah.
It does things culturally that it lays over, and it's ugly, and I can see it's farly outdated, but so am I. But it's a grass that has always performed well, and when I've seen it, and certainly here on the East Coast, it's been a a pretty popular grass. Are a lot of these grasses named after places that they were found? Or maybe the better question is, are a lot of grasses found on properties that as a breeder you would come in and say, hey, here's a patch of grass on this fairway of this golf course that we might be able to do something with? Does that happen, or did that happen?
Yes, that does happen. That happens quite a bit, actually. Particularly right now, we're kind of running out of golf course names. But if you look at the original bluegrass, Marion, Kentucky bluegrass.
Marion, yeah,
it's like
exactly.
right off the Marion Golf. They're in, I think, Ardmore, Pennsylvania,
Ardmore,
in that area.
Yep.
So Marion.
Right down the road, right down the road from where I am.
That's where Marion came from, the Marion Golf Course. Right
Was
there.
Congressional bentgrass from Congressional Golf Course? You know?
Congressional was a colonial type, and yes, it was from Congressional.
So
and,
there
are a number of those.
So these grasses, Marion and Congressional, somebody would look at it and say, hey, this particular patch is really outperforming other grasses that I have on the property, and they would call a breeder in and say, tell me what this is. I mean, and this is going back in the days before we had DNA testing, I'm assuming.
Oh, yes. Yeah, long before. But they would find patches that they really liked, and they would increase those patches themselves. And that would start a new clonal propagated variety. But, this is also, for example, in perennial ryegrass, Manhattan perennial ryegrass was selected right there in Manhattan in Central Park. So again, named after, Manhattan, where it was selected from. So this was, in the early days of plant breeding, this was very common to name it for the area that it came from.
But it would be just something you'd find it on that property, and you'd go there and you'd grab samples of it, and you could propagate it from there and take it into a greenhouse and start working on it.
Yes, yeah, and this was probably happened like back in the 60s mainly. This was going on. Nowadays we've run through so many names that there's none left because you can only use a name one time.
Yeah.
You can't use Congressional again and again and again.
That's too bad.
Just one time is it. So we've kind of run. We can't name another variety Marion, even though it's a great name. But there was one Marion, and that was it. So yeah, the original where the varieties originally came from was often what their names would be.
Yeah, I've heard the story many times, and I've been fortunate to work around Bill Core and Ben Crenshaw, but I've heard that Ben Crenshaw really never liked the Crenshaw that was named after him, and he said, "Why did they have to name it after? Why did they have to name this grass after me?" But like you said,
yeah, that was a Texas variety. We had Cato at the same time came out. It was named after a gentleman, and I can't remember what his history was, named Cato, and so Cato and Crenshaw were both named after individuals.
Wow, that's
Palmer was named perennial ryegrass, a Palmer series.
Right.
Obviously, Arnold Palmer.
But that's a whole series, though, right? Isn't that a whole? That's a series of ryegrasses, is it not? The Palmer.
Correct.
Yeah.
We got smart enough to start naming Farmer 1, Farmer 2, Farmer
probably
3.
because of Ben, because he goes, this grass isn't my favorite, and I've heard him tell that story before, and I find it fascinating and entertaining. He tells it very well. If you have not ever heard him tell that story, sometime. Cato was named after. Was that named after the Green Hornet's sidekick? Is that how that came about? I don't know.
A lot of people say that. It was not.
It was
there
not.
was a gentleman, his last name was Cato, and I should remember his first name, but I don't. This was quite a while back, but Cato was a good variety too, but it was named after a person.
So are most, and again, let's just stay with bentgrass because we're all so familiar with it, but are most bentgrasses, are they now being derived from other sets of parents that have, kind of run their course? Is that the process? I know, Rutgers has generated dozens of different varieties that have come, L93 that kind of came and went. I mean, what's the process? I mean, there's a parent, and then they just start spinning off the parent and raising its children.
Basically, it is. L93 came out in obviously 1993, and that had a lot of different material in there. So it's been reselected and reselected, reevaluated and reevaluated. Continual improvement is kind of like cars, like everything, continual improvement is the way to go. And so the original L93 was replaced by other varieties which were developed from it. And so the genetics were there. It just had to be refined and called recurrent selection, better and better and better, which is sort of a breeding name for continual improvement, is recurrent selection, which accomplishes the same thing. So, and that continues to this day. You go to Rutgers now, all kinds of bentgrass plots there,
Right.
reselecting the top material.
I tell this story often, but in the years that I spent teaching at Rutgers, it was a running joke with some of the guys that would go out into the field and start to select grasses. And we would ask them, you know, what are you planning on planting here? And they said, well, 93. And we would say, do you know there are other grasses? And they wouldn't know. I mean, they were Rutgers graduates. So that was the only grass that was ever discussed there. But obviously in its day, you know, quite a variety. But, you know, that's a good example. I don't mean to pick on L93 or make fun of it in any way or disrespect it. But my understanding, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that and I don't know if this doesn't happen often in the breeding process, but it came out of the chute with a very strong reputation for disease suppression. And you would know, I'm going to assume dollar spot, but I might be wrong there. But it just seems like it dissipated and the value that it had on a disease suppression kind of faded. I don't know if that story is true or if that is a common problem in the breeding process, that if you're breeding for a disease suppression after a series of years, does that suppression start to dissipate? I mean, how does that work?
It does work that way because that disease is not sitting still. It's undergoing its own selection. So of the millions of spores of brown patch or pythium, whatever, even though you've got a very resistant variety, there's still a few that will adapt to that new genetics, and they will start reproducing, spreading, and pretty soon, after 5 or 10 years, the resistance is gone. We see that all the time here, like in, for example, rust resistance in the Lama Valley. We can select a variety that's rust resistant. 10 years later, it's not rust resistant at all because the pathogen has modified itself to adapt so it's a continual struggle between the disease and the breeders. And it's probably never going to be solved, but it's a continual process.
So that would explain a lot of this anxiety that a lot of, especially golf course superintendents have in selecting varieties. I mean, it's a constant conversation, especially when they're going to regrass or new construction, going through the process of selecting grasses. And it's an interesting conversation at the superintendent level because, you know, they want to be very cutting edge, but they also don't want to be the first guy in on a new variety, because I can only imagine, I'm sure you probably have some stories, and I'd love to hear some of them, of some varieties that were coming out of the chute that were supposed to be, and we don't have to mention names, but some varieties that came out of the chute that didn't survive or didn't make it. I mean, does that happen? Has that happened in your career?
Oh, yes. And again, you do have a resistance to new varieties because, let's face it, their job depends on it.
Yeah.
And there's an old story: you never get fired for planting Pencross, which is, right. You know, it's been around so long. I
liked it.
So it continues because it's a safe thing to plant. Everybody knows about it. So the new varieties, but top-notch people that are really into the latest and the greatest will actually investigate it and find some of these new varieties will fit them very well. And we see a lot of golf courses will do some serious studies and they'll plant new stuff because they know that it's going to work. It's not going to fail for them.
So you get this question, I'm sure, a lot. So I'm a superintendent. I've got a project where it's, you know, my livelihood, my job on the line. I got to select a grass. I come to Dr. Pepin and say, Jerry, help me out here. What would you suggest? How would you help? How would you give me some advice as to varieties to select, and particularly on greens?
On greens, of course, your location is everything.
Yeah.
And you've got to have something that'll obviously is well adapted to your local area. And so you've got NTEP trials now. You can look at the NTEP trials, you know, on the bent grasses. and get a good idea if they're going to work. If you got a specific disease problem that's really bad, dollar spot always seems to be, one. You can select the most dollar spot resistant material. If you got a salt issue, you can select varieties that are maybe a little more salt tolerant.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends on where you're located, what your issues are. If you're going to mow it at the very lowest you can mow it, or you're going to mow it a little higher, that makes a difference. So it depends on those type of criteria. Whatever the criteria are, you can come up with a variety that appears to be the best choice for that particular area. And this goes way beyond just golf course greens too. Parks and home lawns and you name it. Sports fields in particular, they've got issues with this, that, or something else. Low pH, high pH, whatever. You can select a variety that'll work best for that particular area. Shade tolerance, very low maintenance, whatever. There's varieties that'll work for those criteria.
Are you actually, other than sodium, which is obvious because that's most likely coming in from water, but are you selecting varieties to address agronomic soil-related concerns, pH or compaction, or versus sand? Are there varieties that are better suited for sand versus soil? I mean, do you guys get down to that level from an agronomic focus, or is it really more the environment above the soil?
More the environment above the soil, because it's so difficult to, there's so many variables already that it's hard to incorporate the soil types as well. So I would say most of it is above the soil is what we're looking at as far as selecting varieties.
So what's hot right now? You mentioned a couple that you guys are working with, Coho and Chinook.
Yes.
Let's say with Coho, I've heard a lot of good things about this. What's the parents behind that?
The parents behind that would be a series of turf plots at Rutgers from maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago that were maybe among thousands. They were the top half dozen in that particular trial for brown patch resistance. Brown patch resistance was, dollar spot resistance was really the key behind Coho. The whole process there was to get the best possible dollar spot resistance. And that's what we looked at. And I believe that's kind of what we came up with Coho, was a very good dollar spot resistance, because that's the kind of the universal disease on creeping bent grasses.
So where would you recommend in the country Coho being best suited?
I think I would look at probably check the NTEP trials for one thing. Well, of course, Chinook is on the NTEP trials. Unfortunately, Coho came out a little too late for the NTEP trials, but certainly anywhere in the Northeast would be very well adapted all throughout the Northeast, and probably the upper Midwest as well. And I think a lot more besides that, but would have to get specific results from, say, California and so forth.
Are these two varieties specific to Vista Seeds?
Yes, they are.
Did you name them because they're both named after salmon?
We did name them. We needed some kind of a.
It's got to be a Jerry Pepin name, I'm assuming.
Rationale. Coho and Chinook.
based on the knowledge I have of you and your passion for salmon fishing, it was pretty clear when I first heard these. I bet those are Dr. Pepin's plants. Talk to me about and this is I don't even know what the term means, but what's the NTEP trial and what does NTEP mean?
Oh, excuse me. NTEP means National Turf Grass Evaluation Program. Okay. It's run out of Beltsville, Maryland. And it's sort of the standard for national trialing for creeping all of bent grasses, actually, perennial ryegrass, tall fescue, and fine fescue. They run a series of trials every year that are planted in 20, 30, 40, 50 locations around the country and in Canada. And so the NTEP results, National Turf Grass Evaluation Program, are kind of the standard that you look at. It's all online. You can check locations. You can check all the different varieties in there. And so we use that a lot for, recommending varieties.
So I go to the field days every summer, and every year there's, laid out 20 different plots, all got INTEP ratings.
Correct.
But it seems like it's an Academy Award. Every year it's a new film. Every year it's a new seed
Yeah.
that has the highest rating. So if I'm looking to build a property 2-3 years out, and I go every year and I study the INTEP, and I don't mean this as a criticism, don't get me wrong, I'm trying to understand. But I go and I look at the INTEP trials, and every year it seems like, oh, well, this one just jumped that one. And I mean, is that not, am I wrong in this confusion, or is this a common problem?
It's an issue, let's put it this way. But as long as you're selecting the upper 10, 15%, you're fine. Don't look at the 6.2 versus 6.1 or 8.4 versus 8.3. Look in the upper 10, 15%, and you'll be fine.
Is there a consistency? So if one seed hits a really strong INTEP number, will that seed typically, that variety typically continue a strong INTEP reading through the next 3-4 years?
Yes, and even longer than that. As long as you're looking in the upper 10, 15%, you will be fine planting whatever perennial ryegrass or Kentucky bluegrass or whatever. Look at that. Don't look at the very number one. That's kind of meaningless. Top 10 or 15%. Generally, that top range will not change that much during the course of the trial. Number 8 might jump up to number 1 and so forth. But if you're looking at the top percentage, you'll be safe and you'll be fine, and it'll work great for whatever your issue is, and for a long time too, not just a couple of years.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. I mean, it seems like there's certain varieties that have just really stayed, the test of time. Bent grasses, again, if we're staying with bent grasses, and and obviously, like you said, Pencross has been there. Now, even the Pencross spinoffs, not quite, the long, maybe I'm wrong here, but not quite the longevity that, Pencross had, the Penn series, Penn trio, and all those. Not to criticize them again, but it just seems like varietally, genetically speaking, they're, sometimes they kind of come off, as the lesser child of the parent.
Yes, Pencross is unique. It's a 3-way cross between 3 parent clones, and which means that you're getting tremendous variability within Pencross. So the Pencross that's grown in California is very different from the Pencross that's grown through natural selection. It will come up very different compared to Pencross grown in Montreal or compared to Pencross grown in South Carolina. After 3 or 4 years, you will have 3 different varieties. They will be very different because there's so much variation within Pencross.
Oh,
So
that's
that's
interesting.
one of the secrets to the success of Pencross. It has so much variation, it can adapt to wherever you plant it.
So does that help us make a decision in terms of buying a variety or selecting a variety? Do we want to look for something with multiple components to it, or are there varieties that are more straight line than what you just described as Pencross?
Well, there are more straight line varieties, as Pencross will do fine if you plant it, say, the metropolitan, the Northeast, the upper Midwest, the mid-Atlantic states. But the newer varieties of creeping bentgrass will be head and shoulders above Pencross in those particular areas.
Yeah.
I mean, you see it when you go to the turf plots. You see it in the NTEP. Pencross is second from the bottom as far as the quality ratings go. So
Discrimination.
yes.
That's all it is. Hey, Jerry, talk to me real quick about, so just give me an idea as to what you guys go through. Now we've selected our variety. You get it out into a field. You've got the variety selected. What's the next process before you guys can get it into a bag? What happens from the time that the variety is actually selected to the time it gets to the bag, puts on the truck, and ships out to my local golf course? What's the time? What's the process? How does that happen?
It will start with what is called breeder seed, which is maybe 5-10 pounds of seed of the finished variety that comes from the original parent plants. That 5 or 10 pounds is planted in a foundation field, and you might plant 2 or 3 acres, something like that, maybe even a little bit more if you get 20 pounds. And that foundation seed is used to plant all the certified seed. The certified seed is what the consumer or the golf course superintendent will buy, certified type seed
Mm-hmm.
And that might be, the 2 pounds, 5 pounds, 10 pounds of breeder seed will be increased to 300, 400, 500 pounds of foundation seed, which will be used to plant 50,000 pounds of the commercial seed, or the certified seed. So that's it's a 3-way step. Now the seed is planted in the fall. We have a very mild winter, so it grows all winter long here. It produces seed heads in the spring, late spring. It produces the seed right about now for bent grass, and it's harvested now. Bent grass is the last thing harvested. Right now, the bent grass fields are being harvested, and it'll be bagged and it'll be ready for selling this fall. That's kind of a thumbnail.
How long is the process from breeder seed to get it down to certified and then get it actually out in a bag to
that would be a 2-year process. The breeder seed,
yeah.
You'd have breeder seed. 1 year out, you'd have the foundation seed. 2 years out, you would have the certified seed.
There are some years when everybody says certain grass, and this might not be just bent grass, but certain varieties, ryegrass, you just didn't have a good crop. Is that weather related? What affects that process?
It's usually not weather related. It's usually a situation where you plant 3 fields, and one of them, for whatever reason, comes up with a bunch of weeds, or it wasn't watered properly, or didn't establish properly. It's usually not the weather, because we've never had a crop failure in the Willamette Valley due to weather. So it's usually a situation where there's been a mistake and it's planted in a field it surprised everybody to come up with weeds. It came up with poania in there, and so the field had to be abandoned. So instead of 3 fields, you're down to 1 field, and so you short on that particular amount of seed.
I assume certification means a lot to do with the weed population in the field.
Yes, if it's obviously has poania, and it's not going to get certified.
Yeah, wouldn't be good, and I'm sure we've seen that story before. Which is
many times.
Yeah. So, I mean, when somebody goes to buy a bag of seed, obviously we're talking certified seed. What's the advice when somebody's looking? And again, maybe we move away from bent grass a little bit, but if we're looking to do some seeding of a lawn or a sports field, what are we looking for? What advice do you have to a turf manager in terms of selecting an actual variety to pick in terms of the quality of the seed?
The quality of the seed, certified seed, of course, is very good seed, and you have sod quality seed as well for sod growers, which is an even higher standard. But if it's certified seed, that's for almost all uses, that's good enough. And also, if you purchase seed from a really long-lasting, high-quality seed house like you and I do business with, they are not going to buy anything that's ever going to hurt a customer. So you can be sure that whatever they're selling has been through a screening process, and they know, and we know, that seed is going to be very good for whatever purpose it's intended. What happens a lot of time, certification can take a long time. And when seed is rushing out the door, and if you're going to have a certified blend or mix, that takes even longer. And a lot of times you can't wait for that. So you send seed out that's certified eligible. It's used in a blend and a mixer. It goes to the half dozen or dozen high quality seed companies that we do business with. I don't know if you want to mention names, but we can, of course. But if you're buying from those companies, you can be assured you're not going to run into a seed quality problem. It's just their reputation is based on it, and our reputation is based on it too. So if you're buying it from a high quality company, it's going to be fine.
So a lot of our mutual business partners, independent turf distributors, you actually do blending for them. So it's no longer a varietal, and you'll do that based on that local knowledge. So a distributor, that we know well in New England, will select a series of seeds and blend it themselves. So it would be a proprietary blend, and you'll work with them to come up with a selection of seeds that is really ideal for that particular local environment. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. That is the way it is done, actually. And in the wintertime, you know, when all the meetings are going on or whatever, we'll have meetings with practically every customer that we work with to go over the coming year's blends and mixtures and so forth, to incorporate the latest stuff, to make sure it fits whatever their needs are. You know, they might have a dozen different mixes that they want to handle for the year, and we'll get together and we'll put those together, and then that's what they'll sell for the year. Every year you reevaluate as well.
So
it's
you're constantly working with these partners to continue the blending of selection. It really works well, and they can do the evaluations in their fields, which is interesting. So there's never really a variety. It's usually this super mix that, you know, a Tom Irwin would put together or a Sierra Pacific would put together, so that they have
absolutely
a selection of things. Always fascinating. Jerry, I want to thank you for all your time. You know, again, we love everybody at Vista Seed, you know, Chris and Marissa and Mandy, and obviously you. I would really be saddened to not mention the fact that quite embarrassingly, you have named a seed after me, which is probably going to be your retirement, I'm assuming, correct? I mean, it's going to be the biggest selling seed in history. And it's, you know, I was very honored until I found out that it was a creeping, I'm sorry, it was a extreme creeper. Is that how you describe it?
That's correct.
Simmons
Simmons is a great creeping red fescue. It's state-of-the-art out of Rutgers. And it's a strong creeping red fescue. 56 chromosome type.
Yeah.
Super spreader. Mixes great with ryegrass and Kentucky bluegrass. Low maintenance shade. It's going to be a really good variety. So,
like I said, it'll be your retirement. I'm sure royalty checks will be coming my way left and right.
You can count on that.
Yeah, I am counting on that. You know, I don't know that I'm going to have a chance to see you this winter. It sounds like a lot of the winter meetings are being canceled because of COVID.
Oh.
So I'm really kind of heartbroken, because some of the most enjoyable times of my career have been hanging out with you and just making fun of you. I mean, enjoying your humor and working with all of you guys at Vista Seed. But I do want to thank you for informing us more on what the heck goes on behind the seed bag. And I want to definitely throw a shout out to Vista. If you guys don't know Vista, you know, I've got no vested interest, and I'm not making a dime on Simmons creeping red fescue, but I do have a couple bags coming to the office here, so I'm looking forward to throwing a little Simmons around, like a lot of other people have been doing for years. But thank you so much. Thank you for everything, and again, hopefully you get to get out and do some fishing, and before this thing is all over, I'm sure we'll get together. Hopefully you don't completely retire before you know, we are able to get back into the swing of the road show. So again, Jerry, thank you so much for your friendship for all the years and for spending some time with me here today. Thank you.
You're welcome, Joel. It's been fun. Always great seeing you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.